Dr. Imrin Dax kicked the rusted panel, half expecting it to collapse in a heap like everything else in this god-forsaken ruin. Another day, another ancient piece of crap, she muttered, her voice echoing in the hollow silence. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of regret, surprising how similar the two could smell. She adjusted her visor, attempting to filter out both the dust and her overwhelming sense of impending doom. It wasn't every day one stumbled upon a relic of the past that might just hold the key to something monumental or catastrophic. If she was being honest, more often than not, it was the latter. "You talk to yourself too much," chirped a voice from the comm in her ear. It was Havok, her assistant back at base. Not by choice, mind you, but because he had the unfortunate honor of being the only person willing to work with her. "Keeps me sane," Imrin replied, stepping over what looked suspiciously like the remains of a former colleague. "And considering our line of work, sanity's a relative term." She reached the center of what must have once been a control room. The consoles were a mess of tangled wires and shattered screens. Imrin crouched down, prying open a panel with her multitool. "Find anything interesting?" Havok's voice crackled again, ever the eager puppy. "Just the usual," Imrin said, pulling out a small, dust-covered device. "Looks like an old data crystal. Probably just recordings of ancient recipes or the latest in primitive social media. You sure it's not the grand key to the universe?" "If it is, we're all screwed," Imrin replied, pocketing the crystal. "The universe has never been very good at letting us in on its secrets." She stood, brushing her hands off on her pants, which were already more dirt than fabric. "Anything from the front lines?" she asked, changing the subject. "Just whispers, rumors, you know how it is," Havok said. "Everyone's talking about aliens trying to clone the perfect human, as if they haven't already tried every other method to wipe us out." Imrin snorted. "Cloning the perfect human, huh? Hope they're not using me as a model." "Nah, they'd want someone with more optimism. Or less baggage," she added, making her way back through the wreckage. "Guess we'll have to wait and see what these aliens are cooking up this time. Maybe it's just a new strain of space flu." "Maybe," Havok said. "Or maybe they're onto something big. If by big you mean another colossal waste of our time, then yes, probably," Imrin replied. "But hey, as long as they're focused on cloning a perfect human, maybe they'll leave the rest of us imperfect ones alone for a while." She stepped out into the harsh light of the alien sun, shielding her eyes. The ruins stretched out before her, a bleak reminder of civilization's past. "This whole sector's a graveyard," she muttered, making her way to the rover parked nearby. "And we're just the vultures picking at the bones." "Vultures with PhDs," Havok corrected. "Yeah, don't remind me," Imrin said, climbing into the rover. She powered it up, the engine grumbling to life with all the enthusiasm of a teenager on a Monday morning. "Heading back to base?" Havok asked. "Yeah," Imrin said, steering the rover onto the rocky terrain. "I've had my fill of ancient dust for one day. And besides, I've got a date with a cup of coffee that doesn't taste like it's been filtered through a sock." "Priorities, priorities," Havok chuckled. "Just don't forget about that data crystal. If it's anything more than old cooking shows, let me know." "Will do," Imrin promised, though she wasn't holding her breath. Rarely did these relics offer anything more than a glimpse into a forgotten world. Still, in the grand lottery of cosmic discoveries, you couldn't win if you didn't play. Back at base, Imrin slumped into her chair, the thin padding doing little to cushion her from the reality of her existence. She fished the data crystal from her pocket, turning it over in her hands. "All right, little guy," she said to the inanimate object. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." Inserting the crystal into the reader, she watched as lines of code began to scroll across her screen. "Bingo," she muttered, eyebrows rising in surprise. "This isn't a recipe, this is." "Schematics? Schematics for what?" Havok's voice was suddenly alert, the sound of shuffling papers in the background. "That's the million-credit question," Imrin replied, studying the lines of data. "Looks like a weapon, but not just any weapon. This could be revolutionary." Havok was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was tinged with awe. "You think this is connected to the cloning rumors?" "Could be," Imrin said, leaning back in her chair. "Whatever it is, it's big, and if the aliens get their hands on it before we do, well, let's just say perfect human might be the least of our worries." The thought hung in the air, heavy as the dust that settled on everything in this cursed sector. Imrin stared at the screen, the weight of discovery pressing down on her. "Guess it's time to call in the cavalry," she said finally, reaching for the comm. "Looks like we've got a race on our hands. And may the best species win," Havok quipped, though his laughter was hollow. Imrin didn't bother to correct him. In this game there were no winners, only survivors, and if the galaxy had taught her anything, it was that survival was the only victory that mattered. Imrin stared at the schematics on the screen like she was trying to decide whether it was a treasure map or a recipe for disaster. In her experience, they were often the same thing. Meanwhile, the base hummed around her, a collection of metal and duct tape that could barely pass for a research station. But hey, it had a certain charm, like a used car salesman with a good story. Just as she was about to dive deeper into the lines of code, the comms crackled again. Havok's voice cut through like a knife that hadn't been sharpened in years. You coming up with anything or just daydreaming about your inevitable demise? You know me, Imran replied, leaning back. Always planning my next big failure. Yes, well, while you're doing that, we've got visitors. And not the friendly kind. Imran straightened, frowning at the screen. Visitors, fan-friggin-tastic. Who invited them? Seems like they invited themselves. Named Xylox claims he's some sort of diplomat, but I've never met a diplomat who doesn't have a knife tucked away for special occasions. Imran snorted. Alien diplomacy usually involved a lot more explosions than handshakes. Well, let's roll out the red carpet. Maybe he'll trip and break his neck. Your optimism is infectious, Doc. That's what they pay me the big bucks for, she replied, though she was pretty sure her paycheck would disagree. She got up, the chair groaning in protest as if it were about to file a formal complaint. As she headed towards the main meeting area, she mulled over the schematics. A weapon possibly tied to the rumors about cloning. If the aliens were sniffing around, maybe they already knew something she didn't. Time to play a little detective, or more likely, a very cynical game of Russian roulette. The meeting room was a masterpiece of utilitarian design, which is to say it looked like an abandoned warehouse. Imran stepped in and there was Xylox, all business suit and 6 eyes, his skin a shade of gray that suggested he'd been left in a basement too long. He had the air of someone who'd sell you a used spaceship with a smile, but would keep the warranty a secret. Xylox turned his attention to her, his smile a little too wide, like he'd been practicing human expressions in a mirror. Doctor. Dax, I presume, and you must be Xylox. Nice to meet the man-sized inkblot causing all the fuss. He chuckled, a sound like someone rubbing sandpaper together. I assure you my presence is purely diplomatic. Sure, and I'm a fairy godmother, Imran said, crossing her arms. What do you want? Straight to business, I see. I like that, he leaned forward, a movement that seemed to involve more tentacle than necessary. We've heard rumors of certain discoveries made in these ruins, discoveries that could tip the balance of power. Balance of power. I thought we were all about peace and understanding, Imran shot back, eyeing him. Or is that just what you tell the recruits? Peace is a delicate thing, Xylox said, not missing a beat. Easily shattered like a poorly made space station, we merely wish to ensure no accidents occur. Accidents like you poking around our operations, Imran asked, noticing Havok slip into the room behind Xylox, giving her a nod. They both knew the drill. Keep the guest happy while you figure out how screwed you really are. Xylox chuckled again, a sound that set teeth on edge. Think of us as inspectors, ensuring safety standards are met. Right, safety inspectors with a side of espionage. A low hum from her pocket brought her attention back to the data crystal. Xylox's many eyes flicked to her hand, his interest piqued. Imran tried to look casual, like she hadn't just remembered she was holding a potential ticket to humanity's next big mistake. Something interesting? Xylox asked, his voice smooth as sandpaper. Just a little light reading, Imran replied, slipping the crystal back into her pocket. You know, bedtime stories. Havok cleared his throat, stepping up. I think what Dr. Dax is trying to say is that all information here is classified. You need to know, and right now you don't need to know. Xylox's smile widened, almost cartoonishly. Of course, we wouldn't want to impose, just interested in mutual benefit. Mutual benefit. Oh, you mean like we benefit from not being disintegrated? Havok asked, his tone as dry as the Martian desert. Xylox stood, adjusting his suit with a flourish. I will take my leave then, but understand we will be monitoring the situation. Delicately, like a sledgehammer, Imran muttered as Xylox turned to leave. Once the door shut behind him, the tension in the room ratcheted down a notch. Imran rubbed her temples. Diplomacy, my ass, more like espionage with a botched facelift. Havok shook his head. Guy's got more layers than a bureaucrat's spreadsheet. Think he's onto something? Probably. And that means we're about to have a hell of a time keeping this under wraps. Imran pulled out the data crystal again, a small weight that suddenly felt like a boulder. I need to figure out what this thing holds, fast. Better hope it's not a cooking show, Havok said, though his grin was strained. Last thing we need is how to serve man as a training video. Let's see what we're dealing with, Imran said, heading back to her workstation. She plugged the crystal back into the reader, watching the lines of code fly by with a mix of dread and curiosity. The door slid open, and Asha, another team member, poked her head in. Hey, I heard we had guests. Or was it just indigestion? Guests singular, Imran corrected, not taking her eyes off the screen. The kind that makes you wish you'd stayed in bed. Asha leaned over her shoulder, peering at the screen. And that's, potentially the reason our guest was sniffing around, Imran replied before muttering under her breath. Or the start of a very bad day. The more Imran dug into the data, the clearer it became that this wasn't just any weapon. It was something that could change the game. Maybe not in a good way. She could almost hear the echoes of history's failures whispering in her ear. warning her about the cost of curiosity. "So what's the verdict?" Havok asked, leaning against the wall with a casual air that didn't match the tension in his voice. "Looks like a weapon designed to amplify biological material. Could be linked to the cloning project. Or something worse," Imrin answered, rubbing her chin. "Something worse," Asha echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Should we expect a parade of mutant bunnies? More like a parade of mutant soldiers," Imrin said, the words tasting as bitter as the coffee she desperately needed. "And they seem interested in a race to the finish line." "Great," Havok sighed. "Just what we need. Mutant armies and the aliens want a piece of it. Time to call in the cavalry," Asha suggested, though the reluctance was clear in her voice. "Or are we gonna try and play heroes first?" "Heroes? In this place?" Imrin snorted. "Not unless you've got a cape somewhere I don't know about." She turned back to the screen. "But yeah, we need to get this info out before Xylox and his merry band of spies get any more curious." "Like I said," Havok piped up, "peaceful diplomacy." "Peaceful like a bar brawl," Imrin corrected, already working on an encrypted message to send back to command. "Let's hope they get this before we end up in more pieces than we're comfortable with." The message encoded and sent, the team settled into an uneasy silence. It was the calm before the storm, though Imrin was pretty sure the storm had already arrived and was just waiting for its curtain call. "You know, maybe this is just one big misunderstanding," Asha offered, though her sarcasm was as thick as the tension in the room. "Sure," Imrin replied, "and maybe pigs fly starships." "Hey, I'd watch that movie," Havok quipped, trying to lighten the mood. It didn't work, but Imrin appreciated the effort. "We need to keep our eyes peeled," Imrin said finally. "With Xylox lurking around, it's only a matter of time before something gives. And when it does, let's hope we're not standing in the blast zone," Havok added, his grin more grimace than humor. "Here's hoping," Imrin muttered, staring at the screen. The data continued its relentless scroll, a reminder of the unknown dangers lurking just out of sight. But then, wasn't that the job? Uncovering secrets, even when you desperately wanted to leave them buried. She sighed, leaning back in her chair, the act of sitting down feeling like the most normal thing she'd done all day. "Time to batten down the hatches," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Looks like we're in for a bumpy ride." And as the shadows grew longer and the atmosphere thickened with unspoken fears, the only certainty was uncertainty. The universe loved its little jokes, and Imrin was starting to think she was the punchline. "Here we go," she whispered, as the base settled into an uneasy wait. Another day in paradise. Imrin Dax was starting to think that the only consistent thing in the universe was inconsistency itself. As she stared at the latest malfunction report, she couldn't help but wonder if she'd pissed off some cosmic entity with a bad sense of humor. Her workstation, a miracle of engineering when it wasn't actively conspiring against her, had decided to take a nap at the worst possible moment. The monitors flickered like they'd been possessed by a disco-loving poltergeist. "Hey Asha, are you getting this too?" she called over her shoulder, trying to reboot the system for the third time that hour. "Only if by this you mean a headache and existential dread," Asha shot back, thumping her own console. "Thought this bucket of bolts was supposed to help us, not make us question the meaning of life." Havok wandered over, coffee in hand, looking like he'd just stepped out of a battlefield. "This place running on optimism again. Maybe that's why we're crashing." "Optimism and duct tape," Imrin replied, slamming a fist on the console. "More reliable than half the tech in here." The base, a haphazard collection of metal and machinery, had seen better days. Every creak and groan felt like it was contemplating an early retirement, preferably in a scrapyard. The team was left wondering if they needed an exorcist instead of an engineer. "Suo," Havok began, dragging out the word like it owed him money, "you think our diplomatic friend had anything to do with this?" Imrin shot him a look that could melt steel. "You mean Xylox, the six-eyed charm offensive? Gee, I wonder." Just then the lights flickered ominously before stabilizing, as if they were trying to decide between on and off. Asha sighed, leaning back in her chair. "It's like the world's worst light show. If I wanted this kind of excitement, I'd watch grass grow on Mars." Imrin's multitool clattered onto the desk, her own attempt to jury-rig a temporary fix proving futile. It seemed like every system on the base had been designed by someone deeply conflicted about the concept of functionality. "All right, we need to figure out what's going on before the whole place decides to take a vacation," Imrin declared, her voice a sharp contrast to the chaos surrounding her. "And by vacation, I mean explode." A loud thud echoed through the room and the team collectively jumped. Havok raised an eyebrow as if daring the universe to explain itself. "Well, that sounds promising," Asha quipped, getting to her feet. "Let's hope it's not the sound of the final curtain falling." The team made their way to the source of the noise, a small maintenance corridor that had all the charm of a broom closet designed by someone who hated brooms. The air was thick with dust and the lingering smell of something that had stopped pretending to be electrical wiring. What the hell is that? Havok asked, pointing to a small device hidden in the shadows, blinking with a malevolent red light. Imrin crouched down, poking at it like she was daring it to explode just to spite her. Looks like a surveillance device. Real slick, like someone took espionage lessons from a particularly sneaky toaster. Xylox, Asham muttered under her breath, her voice a mix of irritation and resignation. Figures? Can't say I'm surprised, Imrin replied, carefully detaching the device. Aliens and their little toys. Would it kill them to send a fruit basket instead? Havok crossed his arms, a frown etching deeper into his features. Sneaky bastard, what do you think he's after exactly? Imrin tossed the device to Asha, who caught it with the ease of someone used to catching metaphorical bombs. Same thing we are, answers. Only problem is his might lead to us getting a one-way ticket to oblivion. Well, isn't that just peachy? Havok said, voice dripping with sarcasm. So what now? We smash it and call it a day. Imrin shook her head. Nope. We find out exactly what it's been recording and see if we can turn the tables. If Xylox wants a game, let's show him we're not above flipping the board. They made their way back to the meeting room, the device now a time bomb of revelation in Imrin's hands. It was a reminder that in a universe full of unknowns, sometimes the biggest enemy was the one you couldn't see. Okay, let's get this thing talking, Imrin said, working the device with her multitool. And hope it doesn't decide to self-destruct out of spite. The screen flickered to life, lines of alien script scrolling past. Asha leaned closer, deciphering with a speed that spoke of too many late nights spent cracking codes. Looks like it's been monitoring everything. Conversations, movements, even. Oh great, lavatory visits, she said, cringing. Real thorough, aren't they? Aliens, Havok deadpanned. Always obsessed with the wrong details. Imrin focused on the more recent recordings, a sick feeling settling in her gut. They know about the weapon, the cloning tech, all of it. Silence fell over the room, the weight of new dangers pressing down on them like a physical force. Imrin could almost hear the cogs of fate grinding, setting the stage for whatever disaster was looming on the horizon. So do we pack up and run for the hills, or do we stand our ground and hope we don't get vaporized? Havok asked, trying for levity but missing the mark. Running isn't an option, Imrin said, eyes never leaving the screen. We've got to get this information out and fast. Before we end up as another cautionary tale. But first, Asha interjected, we need to make sure the rest of the base isn't bugged. They set to work, scouring every corner of the facility for unwelcome surprises. Each discovered device was a testament to how little they really knew about the lengths Xylox would go to ensure his interests were protected. Hours passed, the base taking on the atmosphere of a crime scene as Imrin and her team flushed out surveillance tech like detectives on a case. Every find was another nail in the coffin of their already fragile trust. Think we got them all? Havok asked, rubbing his eyes as exhaustion began to creep in. Imrin surveyed the pile of disabled devices, a mix of frustration and grim satisfaction in her eyes. If we didn't, then Xylox is a better spy than I've been giving him credit for. So what's the plan? Asha asked, her tone surprisingly upbeat given the circumstances. We wait for him to make the next move. Plan is to stay one step ahead, Imrin replied, her voice unwavering. We need to make sure our comms are secure, and then we figure out how to send out what we know without broadcasting it to the universe. The team nodded, the gravity of their task settling in. It was a precarious balance they were trying to maintain, one wrong move away from disaster. But in a universe that seemed to delight in throwing curveballs, what else was new? Guess it's time to play the waiting game, Havok said, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. Hope we don't lose in sudden death. Yes, Imrin replied, her mind already working overtime. But trust me, I'm not planning on losing. As they settled into the uneasy quiet, the only sound was the hum of the bass around them, a constant reminder of the stakes they were playing for. In a universe where peace was just a prettier word for armed truce, Imrin knew they were standing on the edge of a knife. Another day in paradise, she muttered, echoing her earlier sentiment. But this time the words felt more like a challenge than a resignation. The base creaked in agreement, an ancient structure holding its breath as the future loomed uncertain and ominous. Imrin and her team were in for a bumpy ride, but at least they were buckled in. For now, that would have to be enough. The base was having another one of its fits, the kind of tantrum that made Imrin wonder if technology could be haunted. Monitors twitched like they had a nervous tick, and the lights blinked like they were considering early retirement. Another day at the spa, Havok grumbled, sipping his coffee like it was the only thing keeping the universe from collapsing. You think Xylox put the hex on our electrics? Wouldn't surprise me, Imrin replied, squinting at a screen that seemed intent on giving her a light show. He's probably cackling somewhere, 6 eyes glowing like Christmas. Asha rubbed her temples, the universal sign for I'm done with this crap. The day aliens start sending hexes is the day I apply for a transfer to Mars. At least there the bureaucracy kills you slowly. Don't give Mars too much credit, HFY said. I heard their admin offices are where souls go to die. Just as the trio settled into their routine of sarcasm and mutual suffering, an alarm pierced the air, shrill and immediate. Imrin's hand flew to her multitool like a gunslinger reaching for their trusty sidearm. Someone's trying to outdo our usual chaos, she muttered, moving swiftly toward the source of the alarm. As they approached the entrance hall, the reason for the commotion became clear. Xylox, that six-eyed charm offensive, was making his exit. Or more accurately, he was making a break for it, leaving a trail of sparks and mischief in his wake. Someone's had enough of our hospitality, HFY observed, watching Xylox's serpentine form slither toward the escape pods with all the grace of panicked eel. After him, Imrin barked, more out of obligation than any real hope they'd catch the slippery alien. They scrambled down the corridor, their pursuit a mix of determination and dread. Xylox had left them a parting gift, doors jammed open, systems looping through error screens like a demented merry-go-round. It was a little touch that screamed screw you with the subtlety of an asteroid impact. "Bet he's laughing his six-eyed head off," Asha said, vaulting over a fallen panel. "Probably thinks we're a bunch of idiots." Well, he's not wrong, HFY grinned, ducking under a low-hanging cable. But at least we're persistent idiots. Their chase led them through the bowels of the base, a maze of poorly lit, barely maintained corridors where even the dust seemed anxious to leave. They finally caught sight of Xylox near an airlock, the only thing standing between him and the vast, indifferent vacuum of space. "Hey Xylox," Imrin shouted, not even bothering to catch her breath. "You forgot your complimentary get the hell out gift bag." Xylox turned, his expression a blend of annoyance and amusement. Ah, the charming humans. "I was wondering when you'd catch up, leaving without saying goodbye," HFY drawled. "I'm hurt." Xylox's eyes narrowed as he punched a series of commands into the airlock's control panel. "I'd love to stay and chat, but my schedule's packed. Galactic domination and all that." Imrin glanced around, her mind working overtime. "He's stalling," she murmured. "We need to." Before she could finish, the airlock hissed open and Xylox disappeared through it, a shadow swallowed by the void. The door snapped shut behind him, leaving only silence and the faint smell of ozone. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Asha said, hands on her hips. "Yeah, but at least he didn't leave us with a fruit basket full of bombs," HFY added. They turned to leave, resigned to the fact that their alien adversary had slipped through their fingers. But as they retraced their steps, something caught Imrin's eye, a hidden door, ajar and glowing with a sickly green light. "Looks like Xylox left us a consolation prize," Imrin said, gesturing to the opening. The team exchanged wary glances before making their way inside. The room was a lab, concealed behind layers of misdirection and subterfuge. Equipment hummed with a purpose that felt distinctly ominous. "Is it just me, or does this place scream evil lair?" HFY said, unimpressed. "Definitely has the decor for it," Asha replied, running a finger over a console, complete with the ominous green glow. Because why not? As they explored the lab, it became clear what they were looking at: cloning technology, the kind that made ethical dilemmas look like quaint fairy tales. Tanks lined the walls, each filled with a viscous fluid that bubbled with potential horrors. "Cloning," Imrin said, voice flat, "of course. Why steal secrets when you can just copy them?" Xylox must have been using the base as a cover, Asha speculated, her tone as dry as a Martian desert. "Sneaky bastard, yeah, and look where it got him," HFY muttered. Running for his life from a bunch of disgruntled humans, Imrin approached one of the consoles, her multitool ready to pry into whatever secrets it held. "We need to figure out what's on here." It could tell us what Xylox is up to. As she worked, the room filled with the sound of bubbling and the soft hum of machinery, a seductive, deadly lullaby. Information flickered on the screen, alien script and schematics that hinted at a sinister purpose. "They're making weapons," Asha said, scanning the data as it unfurled before them, or at least trying to. "Weapons they can replicate without limit." "Great," HFY said, his tone rich with sarcasm. "Just what the universe needs. Infinite weaponry." Imrin frowned, her mind racing with possibilities. "Xylox has been busy. This could change everything, or end everything," Asha added, not missing a beat. "Depends on how much faith you have in the diplomatic process. Right now, I'd rather bet on a one-eyed horse," HFY replied, crossing his arms as he surveyed the lab. "So what's the play?" "We destroy this place," Imrin shook her head, a plan already forming. "No, we get this information out, and we find a way to use it against them." The task ahead was daunting, but their resolve was firm. They had a chance to turn the tables, and that was more than they could have hoped for in a universe that seemed to build its empires on the backs of the ambitious and the ruthless. "Let's get to work," Imrin declared, her voice steel-edged. "We've got a message to send." They moved through the lab with purpose, gathering data and dismantling the more volatile components. Each piece was a testament to alien ingenuity and disregard for anything but power. "Feels like we're robbing a grave," Asha said, her tone laced with dark humor. "Except the corpse is still out there, plotting our demise. Then let's make sure we're the ones writing the eulogy," Imrin replied, her multitool sparking against a stubborn panel. Eyeors blurred together as they worked, each discovery a puzzle piece in a game of cosmic stakes. They were a small, determined force against a vast, uncaring galaxy, but if they were going down, they were damn well taking a few bastards with them. As they finished, Imrin took a moment to survey the lab. It was a place of nightmares, a reminder that the universe was a playground for those without conscience. But it was also a testament to the fight they had ahead. "Let's get out of here," Imrin said finally, her voice cutting through the weary silence. "And hope Xylox is having as much fun as we are." The team made their way back to the base, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. The air was thick with tension, a prelude to the storm they knew was coming. As they settled into the relative comfort of the meeting room, Imrin allowed herself a moment of reflection. They had a long road ahead, filled with dangers real and imagined, but for now they had each other, and that was enough. "Another day in paradise," she murmured, echoing their shared mantra. The base groaned in agreement, a reluctant ally in a universe that seemed hell-bent on testing them at every turn. "Let's see if we can't make tomorrow a little more interesting," Havok said, cracking a rare smile. Imrin nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. They were in the fight of their lives, and they weren't planning on backing down anytime soon. In a galaxy where every day was a battle, they were ready to face whatever came next, and maybe, just maybe, they'd have the last laugh. The base decided to follow the universal rule that things always get worse before they get better. As Imrin and her team settled into the gloom of the meeting room, the lights flickered indecisively, like they were reconsidering their life choices. Seriously, would it kill the maintenance guys to change a bulb once in a while? Havok grumbled, nursing a cup of coffee that looked more like sludge than liquid. Probably, Asha replied, leaning back in her chair. Last time I saw them, they acted like replacing a fuse was akin to performing open-heart surgery. Imrin, who'd been lost in the glow of her visor, snapped her fingers to get their attention. "All right, people, let's focus. We've got a rogue alien, a secret lab full of potential doomsday devices, and no clue how to explain any of it to command without sounding like we're on a bender." "Sounds like a normal Tuesday," Havok said, taking a sip of his sludge with a grimace. "So what's the plan?" "Simple," Imrin replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We break into the base's comm system, send a message to command, and somehow survive the defenses Xylox probably set up to kill us. Easy peasy. Piece of cake," Asha echoed, "or a piece of whatever passes for cake in this godforsaken place." Their banter was interrupted by a sharp, mechanical screech. The monitors lining the room flickered madly, displaying a message in an unfamiliar script. "Xylox's parting gift, no doubt. Looks like our friend left us a love note," Havok remarked, eyes narrowing at the screens. "I bet it's not an invitation to brunch." The base's klaxon blared once more, a cacophony of noise that made Imrin wonder if deafness might not be a blessing after all. The defenses had been triggered, and from the sound of it, they were about to face an automated temper tantrum of epic proportions. "Gotta love an alien who leaves traps behind," Asha said, eyeing the door warily. "What are we dealing with, considering our luck?" Imrin quipped. "Probably death by 1,000 paper cuts, or laser turrets." They scrambled from the meeting room, moving as one through the barely lit corridors. The base had adopted a decidedly malevolent vibe, the kind that suggests that things are about to go from bad to worse in record time. "Remember when we thought Xylox was just here for the coffee?" Havok mused as they jogged down the hallway, every step echoing ominously. "Ah, the good old days," Imrin replied. Before our lives turned into a bad sci-fi thriller. The corridor led them to the base's central hub, a room that once might have been the epitome of cutting-edge technology, but now resembled the aftermath of a tech convention gone wrong. Panels sparked, conduits whirred, and the air felt charged with static and bad intentions. "Looks like Xylox threw a party and forgot to invite us," Asha observed, kicking aside a tangle of exposed wiring. "Well, let's crash it," Imrin said, making her way to the console at the room's center. "We've got to get control back, or we're going to have a really short lifespan." As Imrin keyed in commands, the console resisted with the kind of passive-aggressive defiance usually reserved for government bureaucrats and malfunctioning printers. Each error message was a slap in the face, a reminder that in space, nothing ever worked as advertised. "Have I mentioned how much I hate alien tech?" Imrin asked, her fingers tapping out frustration against the console. "Only every day since we found this hellhole," Havok replied, glancing nervously at the ceiling as the room's temperature began to rise. "What's the plan if this thing decides to fry us? Die with dignity," Asha suggested. "Or as much dignity as you can muster when you've been outwitted by a six-eyed snake." Imrin shot her a look that was half irritation, half amusement. Let's try not to get fried just yet. Havok, can you reroute power to the backup systems and get this place back online? I'm on it, Havok said, already moving to a nearby terminal. If we're lucky, I'll have us up and running before Xylox's defenses decide to redecorate using our internal organs. While Havok worked his magic, Asha kept watch, her eyes scanning every shadow for the telltale glint of automated death. Imrin focused on the console, coaxing it into cooperation with the promise of a good cleaning and a stern talking to. The minutes dragged by, tension building to a tight, unbearable crescendo. Each second felt like an eternity, a reminder that survival often depended on nothing more than sheer stubbornness. Got it, Havok exclaimed, slamming a fist down on his terminal. Backup systems are online. Now let's see if we can make some noise. With a few deft keystrokes, Imrin accessed the base's comm system, bypassing layers of encryption that seemed designed more to annoy than to secure. The console finally relented, displaying a connection to command that was equal parts relief and impending lecture. We're in, Imrin said, grinning at her teammates. Now all we need to do is convince them we're not insane. Good luck with that, Havok replied, glancing at the monitors, which now displayed the base's internal layout and the various security systems that Xylox had activated. How do we explain this without sounding like we're auditioning for a bad holovid? We tell them the truth, Asha said, her voice firm. Well, as much of the truth as won't get us locked up. Imrin nodded, her fingers dancing across the console. She recorded a message, her words a mix of urgency and grim humor. Command, this is Dr. Imrin Dax. We've uncovered unauthorized alien technology on the base, and it's got a hell of a security system. We need backup, and we need it yesterday. Oh, and if you see a six-eyed snake on your way here, tell him we're not sending Christmas cards. With a flick of her wrist, she sent the message into the ether, praying it wouldn't end up lost in the void like so many good intentions. Now what? Havok asked, his gaze drifting to the monitors that flickered with more than a little malevolence. Now we play the waiting game, Imrin replied, her voice steely. In hope Xylox doesn't have any more surprises for us. The base remained eerily silent, the calm before a storm that promised fireworks and possibly their untimely demise. As Imrin and her team settled in, a low hum began to build, a sound that resonated in their bones and promised nothing good. What's that? Asha asked, her voice tight. Something's coming online, Havok said, eyeing the monitors with a frown. And I don't think it's bringing us cookies. As if in response, the room's lighting shifted to an ominous red. The hum grew louder, a crescendo of menace that set their nerves on edge. Defenses, Imrin muttered. Xylox must have left them in sleep mode. Figured we'd trip over them eventually. Looks like he was right, Asha said, reaching for the weapon holstered at her side. Any chance we can shut them down? I'm working on it, Imrin replied, her fingers flying over the console. But if this thing had any more layers of security, it'd be wearing a damn trench coat. The hum intensified, the room vibrating with the promise of imminent violence. Somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the base, the defenses were waking up, and they weren't in a forgiving mood. How long do we have? Havok asked, his eyes darting between the monitors and the doorway. Best guess, Imrin said, a bead of sweat rolling down her brow. Not long enough to finish my coffee, that's for sure. Brilliant, Asha said, her voice a mix of sarcasm and resignation. Guess we're going to have to improvise. Always with the improvisation, Havok said, shaking his head. One day it'd be nice to have a plan that doesn't involve winging it. Then you're in the wrong line of work, Imrin shot back, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Let's get ready to give Xylox's defenses a warm welcome. As the first of the security drones rolled into view, Imrin and her team prepared to meet the challenge head-on. The air thrummed with tension, the promise of conflict hanging heavy. Here we go, Imrin muttered, drawing her multitool like a knight unsheathes a sword. The ensuing battle was a chaotic ballet of dodging, cursing, and rapid-fire ingenuity. The drones were relentless, their programming a testament to Xylox's penchant for overkill. He's got a real flair for the dramatic, I'll give him that, Asha said, her weapon spitting fire at the advancing machines. Too bad he can't aim, Havok replied, sending a drone crashing into the wall with a well-placed shot. The fight was a testament to human persistence, each blow a reminder that sometimes, survival was as much about grit as it was about luck. They moved as one, a well-oiled machine fueled by adrenaline and gallows humor. Think we can keep this up? Havok asked, panting as he paused to reload. Long enough for command to get off their asses and help, Imrin replied, dodging a laser with a grace she'd later attribute to pure dumb luck. As the last drone fell, its circuit sparking in protest, the room fell silent. Imrin and her team stood amidst the wreckage, a testament to their stubbornness and refusal to go quietly into the night. Nice work, Imrin said, allowing herself a rare moment of pride. Now let's make sure we don't have to do that again. Agreed, Asha said, rubbing her shoulder with a grimace. I'm getting too old for this. Speak for yourself, Havok replied, his grin widening. I was born for this. As the adrenaline faded, they turned their attention back to the console. The monitors, while battered and bruised, flickered with the promise of a connection. "Let's hope Command gets our message," Imrin said, her voice a mix of hope and wariness, "and that they bring more than a get-well-soon card." The base, now silent save for the occasional crackle of damaged wiring, seemed to agree. In the end, it was just another chapter in their ongoing saga, a story of survival, grit, and the occasional alien threat. "Think Xylox will come back for round 2? Asha asked, settling into a chair with a sigh. "If he does," Imrin replied, a steely glint in her eye, "we'll be ready." The base groaned its agreement, a reluctant ally in their fight against the odds, and as they waited for whatever came next, one thing was certain: they were ready to face it head-on, come hell or high space. Imrin's fingers danced over the console, as if she were coaxing a particularly stubborn cat out of a tree. The entire room hummed with a tension that made you wonder if the air itself was plotting against you. The flickering monitors continued their light show, an epileptic fit in progress. "Any chance we can win this staring contest with the base, Imrin?" Havok asked, leaning back against the wall with a nonchalance that screamed, "I dare you to explode." "Working on it," Imrin growled, her voice dripping with the kind of determination you only find in gamblers who just rolled snake eyes. Meanwhile, Asha poked around the edges of the room, her gaze sharp and alert. She poked her head under a desk like a detective expecting to find a clue or at least a forgotten sandwich. "Found anything yet?" Imrin shot over her shoulder, fingers never stopping their dance. "Just dust and bad intentions," Asha replied, straightening up with a sigh. "If Xylox left any breadcrumbs, he sure as hell made them invisible. Or he snorted them," Havok muttered, glancing briefly at the blinking lights that seemed to be communicating in Morse code with the devil. Asha smirked. Xylox always did have a nose for trouble. The monitors flickered again, displaying a jumble of alien script that suggested a keyboard smash rather than a coherent message. Imrin narrowed her eyes at the screen, considering the possibility that the base's operating system was actively conspiring against her. Well, what do we have here?" she murmured, leaning closer as a string of data caught her eye. A critical flaw in the alien cloning process had just waltzed onto the stage, and it was beautiful in its own catastrophic way. "Looks like Xylox's little cloning operation isn't as flawless as he thinks." "What do you mean?" Asha asked, peering over Imrin's shoulder like a student about to cheat on a particularly nasty exam. Imrin's eyes danced with a dangerous glint. They overlooked a key detail in the DNA recombination sequence. A little hiccup that could turn their clone army into a bunch of glorified paperweights. "So we've got a glitch in the matrix?" Havok asked, cocking an eyebrow. "How do we use it to kick them in the teeth?" "I say we leverage this flaw and sabotage Xylox's lab," Imrin said, her voice gaining that peculiar edge of a plan forming. "Expose their plot, turn their own tech against them. We can force a meltdown in their cloning process," Asha snorted. "Sounds like a plan that requires a PhD in suicidal tendencies." Imrin grinned. "Lucky for us, I minored in that." Havok nodded, already moving to collect the gear they'd need. "So we're just gonna waltz in and break their toys. Should be fun." The hum of the bass grew louder, an ominous soundtrack to their preparations. Imrin uploaded the critical flaw data to her visor, the alien script translating into a series of commands that would, if executed correctly, create a catastrophic chain reaction in the cloning lab. "All right, team," Imrin said, her voice a mix of resolve and defiance. "Let's go remind Xylox why humans have a reputation for being a pain in the ass." They moved through the corridors with the kind of stealth that only comes from years of practice and an understanding that the universe is always out to get you. Havok led the way, his senses tuned to every creak and groan of the ancient structure, while Asha brought up the rear, her weapon at the ready. "Feels like we're walking into a trap," Asha muttered, eyes scanning the shadows like they were old enemies. "Probably are," Havok replied with a shrug. "But when has that ever stopped us?" They reached the entrance to the cloning lab, a door that looked like it had seen better days and was none too happy about still being in use. Imrin approached the control panel, her multitool ready to work its magic. Within moments, the door slid open with a reluctant hiss, revealing the lab beyond. The room was a labyrinth of machinery, the air thick with the hum of alien tech. Flickering lights cast erratic shadows that made the place feel more like a haunted house than a cutting-edge facility. Clone tanks lined the walls, filled with the embryonic forms of Xylox's would-be army. "Home sweet home," Havok quipped, eyeing the nearest tank with distaste. "Wouldn't mind redecorating." "How long do we have before Xylox decides to check in?" Asha asked, scanning the room for any immediate threats. Imrin glanced at her visor, the data streaming across her vision like a particularly aggressive stock ticker. "Not long." "Let's crash this party and get out." They moved through the lab, Imrin guiding them to the central console with the kind of precision that only comes from being in way over your head but refusing to admit it. She set to work, her fingers a blur on the alien interface, exploiting the flaw with the kind of malicious glee usually reserved for tax auditors and vengeful exes. "How's it looking?" Havok asked, keeping watch at the lab's entrance. "Like a powder keg with a really short fuse," Imrin replied, her voice tight with concentration. Ashat chuckled, moving to help Imrin secure the area. "Just how we like it." The seconds ticked by, each one a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Imrin's visor beeped, signaling the process was ready to implode with the right nudge. "All right, here goes nothing," she said, keying in the final command with a flourish. The machine's word to life, a symphony of chaos that promised fireworks and very unhappy aliens. "Time to go," Havok shouted, his voice cutting through the din. They bolted from the lab, the sound of machinery reaching a fever pitch behind them. The base's corridors felt like they were narrowing, as if the structure itself was trying to trap them in its embrace. Footsteps echoed ominously, a reminder that they weren't alone and never really were. As they reached the central hub, the base shuddered with the force of the explosion from the lab. The floor vibrated beneath them, the sound of shattering glass and twisting metal, a siren song of destruction. "Think they noticed?" Asha asked, breathless. "Hard to miss," Imrin replied, her adrenaline-fueled grin a testament to their audacity. Havok checked their surroundings, his gaze sharp. "We've sent a message, loud and clear. Now let's make sure they get it." They regrouped at the central console, Imrin accessing the comms system once more. As the base's systems flickered back to life, she sent a new message to Command, her words full of urgency and a certain grim satisfaction. "Command, this is Dr. Imrin Dax. We've sabotaged Xylox's cloning lab. The alien plot has been exposed, but we need immediate extraction. Send backup, bring snacks. Over." She closed the channel, the weight of her actions settling in like an unwelcome guest. The base was eerily quiet now, the calm after the storm, leaving them with nothing but their thoughts and the occasional crackle of damaged wiring. "So, what now?" Havok asked, glancing at the monitors that still flickered with stubborn resilience. "Now we wait," Imrin replied, her voice steady. "And hope Command gets here before Xylox decides he wants a rematch." "Always the optimist," Asha said, settling into a chair with a sigh. "Next thing you'll tell me is that they'll bring us a fruit basket. If they do, I'm calling dibs on the bananas," Havok said, stretching his arms with the kind of satisfaction that comes from narrowly avoiding death. As they waited for reinforcements, the reality of their situation settled in. They'd taken a stand, drawn a line in the cosmic sand, and while it was far from over, they'd done something that mattered, something that proved humanity's talent for stubbornness. "So how does it feel to have poked the bear?" Asha asked, her gaze fixed on Imrin. "Feels like I need a drink," Imrin replied, a wry smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "But it also feels like we've got a fighting chance." The base, a testament to both their reckless courage and dogged determination, stood as a silent witness to their defiance. And as they waited for whatever came next, they knew they were ready to face it, armed with nothing more than grit, gallows humor, and the knowledge that sometimes the universe needed a good kick in the teeth. The base was silent as the grave, and given how things usually went for them, that was probably an ominous sign. Imrin, Havok, and Asha huddled in the central hub, their ears pricked for the inevitable sound of bad news approaching. They just pulled off a stunt that was either going to make them legends or a cautionary tale, and the universe hadn't quite decided which yet. "So we've turned Xylox's little science fair project into ground zero for a cosmic temper tantrum," Imrin said, her gaze fixed on the flickering monitors, as if they might start speaking the Queen's English at any moment. "Now what? Now we wait for the fireworks," Havok replied, his voice carrying the bored resignation of someone who'd seen one too many action flicks and found reality severely lacking by comparison. "Think it'll be a big enough bang to take out the whole cloning facility?" Asha asked, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of anticipation and the kind of recklessness that comes from knowing you're playing for keeps. Imrin shrugged, her fingers still dancing over the console as she set up a few more surprises for any unwanted guests. "If we're lucky, it'll do more than just singe Xylox's eyebrows off. Here's hoping he's got life insurance," Havok muttered, leaning back in his chair like a man expecting a front row seat to the end of the world. Though with the premiums on mad scientist plans, he probably skipped that expense. His health plans got bigger holes than Swiss cheese, Imrin quipped, adjusting her visor to a setting that might give them a heads up when things went from bad to worse. Which, given their luck, was about as inevitable as death, taxes, and the universe stealing your lunch money. The base shuddered again, a distant rumble echoing through the corridors like an angry giant deciding it didn't like the cut of their jib. The lights flickered, doing their best impression of a nightclub strobe, and Imrin cursed under her breath. "Great, the base is throwing a tantrum," she grumbled, giving the console a good hard whack. Just what I needed. Hey, easy on the tech, Asha said, though her grin suggested she approved of Imrin's motivational speaking techniques. We might need that to get out of here, or to order pizza, Havok added, apparently unconcerned by the impending doom and more worried about the lack of snacks. Imrin rolled her eyes. Focus, people. We've got a mad alien scientist to catch. As if on cue, the door hissed open, and in marched the last person they wanted to see, Xylox himself, looking like he'd just been informed his favorite lab rat had unionized. He was flanked by a pair of lackeys who seemed to think scowling angrily would intimidate anyone who wasn't a half-blind geriatric. Ah, the meddling humans, Xylox sneered, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension only a megalomaniac with delusions of grandeur could muster. I should have known you'd be behind this. Nice to see you too, Xylox, Imrin said, not bothering to hide her smirk. Hope you enjoyed our little makeover of your cloning lab. Xylox's eyes narrowed, the flickering lights casting sinister shadows across his face. You've made a grave mistake. Wouldn't be the first, Havok replied with a shrug, and probably won't be the last. Before Xylox could respond with whatever diabolical monologue he'd clearly been rehearsing, Ashaz's sharp eye caught movement from the door. Reinforcements, more of Xylox's cronies, their expressions a mix of fear and anger, the kind of look you get when you realize the party's over and someone's puked in the punch bowl. Looks like you brought friends, Ashaz said, cocking her weapon with a smooth, practiced motion. Pity we didn't RSVP. Xylox's grin faltered as he realized they weren't trapped rats, they were the cats who'd found a new toy to play with. Imrin's fingers flew over the console, activating the traps she'd set up in anticipation of this kind of showdown. A low hum filled the air as one of the wall panels slid open, revealing a series of emitters she'd jury-rigged to target the clone lab's infrastructure. The lackeys glanced around nervously, clearly questioning their boss's judgment in taking on these humans. Let's see how your operation handles a bit of constructive criticism, Imrin declared, and with a flourish she pressed the big, red button. Every good sabotage plan had one. The emitters fired up, sending waves of energy pulses arcing through the air. Sparks flew, and the lights flickered in a grand finale of chaos that was, frankly, overdue. Xylox's expression morphed from smug superiority to dawning horror as his precious lab fell apart at the seams. He sputtered, no doubt struggling to come up with a suitably villainous retort that would double as a prime-time TV quote. Oh, come now, Xylox, Havok goaded, got nothing to say about our redecorating, the alien scientist glared, but before he could muster a response, the base gave another violent shudder, the sound of machinery reaching a catastrophic crescendo. Ashaz used the distraction to move, taking out Xylox's lackeys with a few well-placed shots. Each one went down with a thud that echoed satisfyingly in the suddenly empty corridors, leaving Xylox looking rather abandoned and significantly less cocky. Looks like it's just you and us now, Imrin said, turning her attention back to Xylox, who was glancing around as if hoping a cavalry would magically appear. Ready to play nice, Xylox's eyes darted to the door, clearly weighing his chances. But before he could make a move, the base's main alarms blared to life. Ashaz's handiwork, no doubt. Time's up, Xylox, Ashaz said, her voice carrying the grim satisfaction of a job well done. End of the line, defeated, Xylox slumped, the fight draining out of him like a deflated balloon. He knew when he was beaten. Even a mad scientist had to acknowledge reality occasionally. So what's the plan for our new friend here? Havok asked, glancing at Xylox with about as much sympathy as you'd give a particularly annoying fly. Command will love to have a chat with him, Imrin replied, her fingers a blur on the console as she locked down the base's systems. And I'm sure they'll have a nice cell ready with his name on it. Great, Havok said, his tone light. I hear they have a lovely view of nowhere. Xylox offered nothing more than a disgruntled huff, clearly unimpressed with their banter. But as the base settled into an uneasy silence, the team knew they'd done what they came to do. They dismantled Xylox's operation, exposed his twisted cloning scheme, and lived to tell the tale, a trifecta of success in a universe that seemed determined to see them fail. Well, that's one way to end the day, Imrin said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied sigh. Not bad for a bunch of humans, not bad at all, Ashaz agreed, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting the universe to try one more dirty trick. But for now, at least they'd earned a moment of peace. The base was secure, Xylox was contained, and they could finally breathe. Let's hope Command gets here soon, Havok said, his voice carrying the familiar mix of hope and cynicism. I'm ready for that drink, a toast to survival, Imrin said, raising an imaginary glass. To surviving the universe's worst attempts at entertainment, Ashaz added, grinning, and to giving it the finger, Havok finished, a wry smile on his lips. They sat in comfortable silence, the calm after the storm, knowing they'd faced the odds and come out on top. How long that would last was anyone's guess, but for now, it was enough. The universe might throw them another curveball tomorrow, but they'd be ready. Because if there was one thing they excelled at, it was being a royal pain in the universe's behind, and they wouldn't have it any other way. The base had finally stopped groaning like an old man with gout, the echoes of Xylox's cosmic hissy fit fading into the background like a bad dream. Imrin Dax leaned against the console, feeling the kind of exhaustion that could only come from pulling off a caper no one in their right mind would ever attempt. But then, sanity was usually the first casualty on jobs like these. Well, that was fun, Havok said, deadpan as ever, like he was rating a moderately entertaining sitcom instead of a life-threatening escapade. Think the Empire's gonna send us a fruit basket or a hit squad? Probably both, Asha replied, her eyes still flicking over the room as if expecting Xylox to pop back up, cartoon villain style. Gotta love bureaucracy. They'd sooner blow us up than send a thank you note. Imrin snorted, adjusting her visor which had so far managed to survive the chaos, unlike her dwindling patience. I'll settle for them not sending us the bill for the damages. Mad scientists are hell on the budget. Havok stretched, joints cracking like someone had forgotten to oil the machinery. We made it out alive, and if the Empire's got any sense, they'll see the value in that. Humans are pesky, sure, but we're darn good at sticking around. He flashed a grin that was as much teeth as it was charm. Or maybe they'll dissect us, try to figure out how to make more, Ashak quipped, checking the charge on her weapon. Bet they're scratching their heads over how we managed to pull this stunt off. Let them try, Imrin said, with the kind of bravado reserved for those too tired to care about consequences. We're a mystery wrapped in a conundrum wrapped in. Well, a whole lot of attitude. And caffeine, Havok added, as if that was all the explanation needed. They made their way toward the makeshift comms system, Imrin fiddling with the settings to send a message to command. The base's equipment was about as cooperative as a cat on bath day, but she coaxed it into compliance. She only hoped it would hold together long enough to get their message across. Command, this is Dax. Base secure, Xylox detained, ready for pickup. And maybe a pizza if you're feeling generous, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the storm that had just passed. She leaned back, imagining the expression on whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the other end. The silence that followed was almost comforting, the kind you only find when you've been through hell and back. It gave them a moment to consider just what they'd accomplished. You know, the Empire might actually give us a medal for this, Havok said, his tone carrying the weight of a man who didn't particularly care for shiny trinkets that didn't explode. Great, I'll put it next to the thanks for not screwing up plaque, Imrin replied, shaking her head. Let's not kid ourselves, they'll probably just add us to some list of humans to watch out for. Already on that list, Asha said with a smirk. I think they call it wanted. They shared a laugh, the kind that comes when you've nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They'd taken on a mad scientist, survived a collapsing base, and lived to tell the tale. If that didn't deserve a chuckle, nothing did. As the echoes of their laughter faded, the team settled into an uneasy quiet, each lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. The Empire's response was still an unknown, a cosmic coin flip that could land on either side. So, what's next? Asha asked finally, her voice cutting through the quiet like a beam of light through a dusty room. Besides the obvious not dying part, Havok replied, leaning against a wall that looked as if it might give up and collapse out of spite. Maybe we take a vacation. In this economy, Imrin shot back. I'll settle for a day without someone trying to kill us. Small dreams, Asha said with a grin. Keeps us grounded. Before they could delve deeper into plans of hypothetical relaxation, the comms crackled to life with a response from command. The voice was clipped, professional, and utterly devoid of humor, a stark contrast to their ragtag group. This is command. Acknowledge Dax, retrieval team en route. Sit tight and try not to break anything else. Imrin managed a half smile, pleased that their plea for extraction had been heard. Copy that, command. We'll keep the explosions to a minimum. As the link went dead, Imrin turned to her team, a sense of finality settling over the room. They'd done it. They'd faced the universe's worst and come out swinging, a testament to human perseverance, or more accurately, stubbornness. Guess we sit tight then, Havok said, his voice carrying that same mix of resignation and expectation, like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hope they bring snacks, and maybe a new workstation, Imrin added, giving the console a half-hearted pat. This one's about as reliable as a politician's promise. As they waited, the reality of their situation sunk in. They'd become something of a symbol, a ragtag band of humans who'd stood up to a mad scientist and shown the universe what they were made of. Sure, they were rough around the edges, but they were also resourceful, determined, and just mad enough to pull off the impossible. You think they'll make a vid about this? Asha mused, her mind already spinning with the possibilities of stardom. I can see it now, 3 humans and a mad scientist. More like 3 idiots and a half-wit's plan, Havok corrected, but his eyes were alight with the same spark of mischief that always got them into trouble. Might even get a cult following. Only cult I want is one that worships sleep, Imrin said, stifling a yawn that threatened to break her jaw. The kind where naps are mandatory. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the oppressive silence of impending doom. It was the kind of quiet that comes when you know you've done something worth remembering, even if no one else ever sees it that way. They defied the odds, and if the Empire had any sense, they'd recognize the value in that. Humans were a wild card, unpredictable and stubborn, but they often did the impossible, and that was their strength. Hours passed as they waited for Command's arrival, the calm after the storm stretching out like a lazy cat in a sunbeam. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't running, hiding, or fighting for their lives. They were just existing. "Think Xylox will send us a thank you note?" Asha asked, breaking the silence with a question that was half serious, half jest. Imrin chuckled, the sound echoing in the stillness. "If he does, I'd love to see the postage on that." Finally, the telltale hum of engines signaled the approach of their ride home. Relief washed over them like a cleansing wave, the knowledge that they'd soon be away from this mess a balm to their weary souls. "Look alive, team," Havok said, straightening with the kind of energy that came from knowing you were about to leave a very bad place behind. "Our chariot awaits." They gathered their gear, leaving behind the chaos and destruction they'd wrought, but taking with them a story that would no doubt be retold in taverns and backrooms across the galaxy. As they boarded the ship that would take them back to whatever version of normal waited, Imrin cast one last look at the base, now little more than a scar on the planet's surface. "Think we'll ever get to do something like this again?" Havok asked as they settled into their seats, the engine's soft hum a comforting lullaby. "Let's hope not," Imrin replied, though her smile suggested she wouldn't entirely mind. "But if we do, at least we know we're capable of surviving." "Yeah," Ashar agreed, eyes closing as she leaned back. "Here's to being too stubborn to quit." The ship lifted off, the ground shrinking away beneath them as they soared into the stars. They'd faced the universe's madness and come out on top, a testament to what humans could do when pushed to the brink. "To us," Imrin said softly, raising an imaginary glass in salute. "To the fools who dared," Havok added, his grin as irreverent as ever. "And to whatever comes next," Ashaf finished, a glint in her eyes hinting at the adventures still to come. Together, they left the planet behind, carrying with them the weight of their victory and the promise of whatever challenges lay ahead. They'd shown the universe what humans were made of: grit, determination, and just enough madness to make it all work. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough.